So we're actually going to move deeper into Keyman mobile development, and I'll show Keyman itself, the Keyman developer, as we go through this. But I just wanted to review about creating mobile layouts. A person has gotten into Keyman and developed a desktop layout that seems reasonable. There is a way to easily add a touch-optimized keyboard as one of the outputs of this. And then there's an option that one can use that will automatically build a keyboard layout for mobile that includes fewer rows and has more layers. And it positions keys from the desktop layer on these layers. And if one needs to, one can easily add new layers for symbols and numerals or other special things for the particular language if it needs more keys. That's pretty easy to do. One can also remove rows or individual elements from any and all layers, move keys to new positions, change their shape and size, and so on. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. The thing that's useful is if diacritics are needed and they are used interactively. For example, with an A with a grav accent, one can easily build a key that says its output is the grav accent, and that can be added to whatever key precedes. The other thing that we didn't get to last week is talking about the long press. And that's a particularly useful aspect of mobile devices because people can indeed hold something down and see, basically it's a menu of options. Most of you are familiar with long presses, and they're usually applied to vowels in English and other languages to select diacritics based upon that. But they can be used for any character. So what I'd like to do is go back to this very simple keyboard layout that was defined. It was the basic keyboard layout. This is the desktop view, and I added a few keys, a few defines for the X, capital Y, capital F on these keys on the base layer. I added a reversed K on the K key, and I added a lowercase l with a bar across it on the B key. So these are just examples of how one can add these to the desktop layer. But now one can go to the mobile layer, and let me show you this with Keyman Developer itself. This is the Keyman Developer project layer, and Keyman project has a number of keyboards defined here. I'm going to try to find the right one. Upside.kmn. KMN is the Keyman mission. Keyboard layout here. This the keyboard layout is invisible because it's a little bit more complicated. I have some rules. For example, I have defined something called a new symbol here, which we'll get to in a moment. The on-screen keyboard is an easy way of seeing what this is. And I have built the touch layout, which is viewable in several different ways. First of all, to start with the mobile layout, one imports that from the on-screen layout. So it basically takes a copy of this and produces the version here, and you can see that it only has this particular one has fewer layers, or I'm sorry, this particular one has more layers than I expected, actually. I wanted to pick touch layout, the second one. Let's see. I believe will have fewer layers. Yes, I'm sorry, fewer rows. It has only 3 rows for letters. It has more layers, however. I'm going to set it up to work for set it up to use a phone. I'm going to show you that there are several layers defined here. Under layer, default shift numeric symbol had been pre-populated with things right out of the basic desktop keyboard, but there are symbols that are commonly used that are already added that one may not always use here. But these keys have been basically set up based upon the desktop layout. The keys for on the A key, the Y key, the F key, and so on that were defined in the desktop layout are set up here, and they all work just fine. Now, if I want to add something like a long press to a particular key, I can do something like this. I click on the key, and here, this one has already added long presses for me because I've created a new layout here. It says, oh, on this particular key, it's very useful to have these characters as output with a long press. I might not want to use these particular ones, or I might want to add a new one, but let's take a look at the definition of each one of these that are predefined. Here on the A with a grav accent, and you see on the right-hand side, it talks about, or it gives the characteristics of that particular long press. It says that its key cap is going to be text. So it's going to be a text value. Its key type is default here. And it has a particular Unicode value, which is defined by this method of saying what the Unicode value is. This one is 00E0. If I click on this one, you'll see that it comes 00E1. And are just Unicode definitions of these particular keys. This is a very simple way of saying what the output of the key is. Just give it the Unicode value, and it works. And so that particular one has a set of long presses defined. But suppose I wanted to add a new one. Suppose I'd like to have X, lowercase x, in addition to the uppercase X. So here I click on a new value, and you can see that it comes up with an ID. It's a new ID. The ID is not a Unicode character. The ID is a way for me to define anything I'd like with that. I could say, in this particular case, I'd like to actually have the lowercase x as an output here. And that shows me that that is the Unicode value for this. And I'm going to change this from this new identifier to the Unicode definition by setting this up here. I've defined the output of that long press key to be a lowercase x. And in addition to all these others here, we'll produce that lowercase. Now, I may not be interested in having all of these keys as long presses here. For example, this AE ligature, I'm not interested right now. So I can easily click on this little X and remove it. Also possible to add new ones to the left or right of a particular one by using the little plus signs in the green triangles below, and that will let you add. You'll also note that there are a couple of other options for each and every key on the mobile. There's something called flick and something called multi-taps. I'm not familiar with these yet, but Keyman has lots of good documentation on how to use these. The most important thing for long press is to add the long presses you need, define each of them in terms of what they are going to be. They're usually text. They can have particular values associated with it, and the ID indicates what it does. So now you'd like to see perhaps if this actually will work. A keyboard is pretty nice. First of all, one has to compile it. Basically, it says, man developer, go through each and every one of the rules, go through each and everything that have been defined here and see if they are consistent. And if they are, it will build an output to be used. Once I have compiled it and it's successful, I go to build and I can say simply, I want to test it. So I say build, test a keyboard on the web, and it's very convenient to pick a one of the options here that can refer to my own computer. So what I do is I pick one of these addresses and I say open in browser. Okay, that particular one seems to be working. One can pick the keyboard. So I'm working on the keyboard called Upside. I select the keyboard. The model isn't terribly important here, but I can tell it to use different devices. If I pick the Windows or Mac OS or Linux, it will just show me what the desktop is. And I can actually click on each of these keys and it will produce the output. And also with this, using the physical keyboard, we'll do the same selections. It's more interesting if I select the output as defined on my mobile layout. Here, we're seeing, I'm going to delete these characters. If I click the X key, it produces the X. If I produce Y, it produces the Y. If I click on the X, it actually shows me the long press option. You can see that all these long press options that I had are there, and including this X. So let me choose the A with the Grave accent. You can see that it produces that. It also shows the Unicode values in each one of these. And here it produces the X, and all of these are defined. I do the same thing with uppercase, and there are predefined long presses for each of these, so that's what I'm seeing here. The other layers are producing standard values for these positions on the keyboard. I've missed something so that I'm not seeing the actual characters themselves. That's probably a configuration thing that I've missed. But going to the symbols layer, going back to the numeric layer, going to the lowercase and uppercase are all defined by these keys, which are built into the mobile device. So basically, I'm checking out the mobile device on my local computer before I have to install it on my mobile device. We've basically done something like what I've said here, selecting position in a layer, selecting the plus sign under long press, and adding the details in the right panel is the way one defines a long press. And that is a really nice way of working with the Keyman. They're important to note that there are several ways of identifying what you can put there. The Unicode values can be put into the area that is called ID. This should be a U with an underscore rather than a plus sign for the actual Unicode value if you want to define a particular character. In other places in Keyman, one can just put a quote mark around the character you want. The key position can be used, and for example, key underscore A refers to the position on the desktop layout that is in a normal A position. A shift A produces the same, but in a shifted position. And there's this rather fun thing called the new identifiers, which lets us actually add things that can be any set of characters. So I'll show you about that. I'll show you how that works in just a moment. What it does is when you say for a new long press or a new key to be added, it will often give you a new identifier, give you it with a unique number at the end of it. This identifier refers to a rule that's in the base layout, in other words, in the desktop layout. And the output of this can be defined as any sequence of characters. So let me switch back to Keyman. I have actually defined a key in here. It is in the code for the base layer of Keyman. And I've said, let this identifier T underscore new underscore 334 be definition, and its output is just a sequence of characters. And I put them in quotes, some characters here. I go to my touch and add a new one here and change this to T334 E334, then I'm going to have it just something small up here in the text output layer. You can see that one of the options here, I'm sorry, it compiles. I go back to the layer and go to Keyman developer test. I simply reload that page, and I should have the new definition of that. Now, if I look at the long press or this position here, you can see that it shows me the dot, dot, dot. That is the text that I define for that long press key. If I select that, you can see that its output is actually a whole bunch of characters. Those some characters are being extracted from the base Keyman rule that says that key underscore new underscore 334 will produce it. So if you want particular keys, particular long presses to have more output, more complicated output, one has to do is define them as a new symbol, key underscore.
You created a variable definition effectively, right?
Yes.
Or that string literal. But why did you do that in the layout and not in the touch layout code?
Well, first of all, it's easier to add in the layout code. Honestly, I'll be quite straightforward with you. The code for the mobile is a lot harder to read. It is a difficult format that has bunches and bunches of braces and lists of things, and it's much more difficult to read.
Right.
But anything that is defined in the base layout is also available to that touch layout, automatically put into the touch layout. So even though this particular one in the base layout would not be defined unless I add it to a particular, finding it here is easy and lets me do what I need to very easily.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
One can add all kinds of things in the base layer for the layout that will work on desktops, and most of those things will also work in the touch layout. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know about Keyman or have not yet explored, but suffice it to say that it's a very flexible editor for keyboards. It lets one do all kinds of things, and it lets you get in trouble really easily. For example, let me show you a way to get in trouble. If I click on the K shift and I say, I would like the K shift not to do what it normally does, but I'd like the K shift to do nothing. Its next layer is nothing. When I rebuild it next time, the K shift button will basically be broken. It won't let me do that. Or I can tell it to go to a different layer, numeric or symbol layer. The default is quite fine, but each and every key can actually have a next layer defined where it would go. So if you say that you would like your capital F to produce an output and the next character and the next layer that it shows would be the symbols layer, do that. So it's very, very flexible, defining the behavior of each and every key, not only with its foot, with its long press, and with its behavior after you've actually touched the. It's also interesting to note that if you want to move things around, change the positions, that's very easy to do. For example, the D key, perhaps I didn't want it in that particular place. I can actually physically drag it and I can move it to the upper left. Everything would adjust. It isn't very pretty there, but it's moved back very easily by just dragging it with my mouse and putting it in the right position. Also say, I'd like to add a key to the right of that. The little lines below it, let me add a new position. And you can see here that it's got a new identifier defined. It is to the right of it because I clicked the little right green triangle, and I could define that key to be anything I wanted to as well. I'm going to get rid of it because I'm not interested in it right now. Other thing that's easy to do is I could say, I'd like this to be padded to the left. Maybe add a little bit of space to the left of that key, or I'd like that key to be 50 wide. And individual keys can be put within this matrix and their shape can be adjusted very easily. By default, adding widths and so on are predefined, and in most cases, they do whatever you want. The editing for mobile is more flexible than the editor for the physical layout because you have more things to work with. And it works pretty nicely. Easy to get confused, but it's also easy to produce a very flexible layout. I had one group, for example, that said, that I want to set up a layer which is all caps. So a different kind of shift. Normally shift goes to a layer, and very often people will expect after shifting and typing one character, it will go back to the base layer. One can find another layer that is basically a caps lock layer, and each and every key for that would stay on that same layer rather than reverting back there. And I can try to demonstrate that if I go to the shift layer, for example, and pick any key. It says the next layer for each of these is here it's not defining a selection, but I could define a selection for what layer to stay on here very easily. And I could have a caps lock layer. I could have a layer where everything reverts back to the unshifted layer. Layers are very flexible and let me do an awful lot of things. One thing that's really useful to do, of course, is that one should always save the results. Control S on Windows will save this. The little asterisk by and the status mark by this indicates that it wasn't saved. Now I've saved it. And to build, one can easily go to the build actions and note green lines indicating success. One can also do this from a function key or from the menu to compile the keyboard. And that keyboard indicates that everything is okay at the moment. I can break it. If it indicates, or if I've made a mistake somehow, either in my rules or in my physical setup, it will tell me, and usually it will give me some idea about what's gone wrong. The most common mistake that I find is that I have defined a symbol, T underscore something, that is not yet put into the layout rule. In that case, I either have to change the symbol to be, change the identifier to be an exact Unicode symbol, or actually put the rule in the layout, and that will sometimes it takes a couple of iterations, but compiling is very fast here. So that is the basics of building a keyboard for mobile. Now you might say, well, this is great that I can end this on my Keyman developer and that I can test it in a browser, but I'd actually like to do something more with that. I actually like to work on this with a mobile device. And so let me go back to my slide deck, see if there's anything more that I want to tell you about this part of Keyman. I've got a couple more things. I've shown you how to test the mobile in the browser. I'd like to just mention a couple of other things to check. Transition between layers, making sure key types can be set, different things, keys can be repositioned and so on. This is all very flexible, and that pretty much concludes what I wanted to say about mobile.
Yeah, I'm understanding that basically all the keys should be defined with their associated output in the layout layer. And
Mm-hmm.
then you basically just pull them into your respective, like on-screen and touch layout. But the association is always in the layout layer, basically, which means that if I want to remove something from one layer in the touch layout, I delete it there. But then if I add it to another layer in the touch layout, I have to make, or it's best practice probably to make sure that I actually refer to the key that is already defined in the layout. Is that correct?
I think that's a good way of saying it. Basically,
Okay.
this layout layer and the code for this defines everything that can be done in both the physical layout and the touch layout. This is a good place to have simple definitions of everything you're doing here and refer to them in one simple place.
Okay, thanks.
And then when you've defined your base layout, from the base layout to the on-screen, one can fill that from the layout that automatically populates this, and the touch layout be imported from on-screen, which I'm not going to do because that would get rid of my current touch layout. But
Yeah.
One builds it in pieces and then tests out each piece as you're going. But the interaction among the touch layout is, as we've discussed here, a little bit complicated. Put the rules in the layout.
Okay, thanks.
So the emulator you showed, sorry, there may be a better name for it, where you were doing the mobile device, but you went to a URL and it showed that what you've programmed for the mobile device actually running in their emulator. What is that called?
It's a testing mode in the browser.
Testing mode. Okay. Can that URL be shared? My second question is, can that URL be shared? Like if I've got the Fort Sill Apache folks online and I'm talking to them, can I run that emulator on my machine and can they see it on their end in a browser and go, cool, this is what we want?
Good question. And let's go to the build or test keyboard on web and see. Perhaps. I think you might be able to define this is an advanced topic that I don't know a lot about. You can define a web address and send that web address via email to somebody else, I believe.
Okay.
Perhaps you can configure to use a kind of server or make it publicly available. This is an advanced topic, and I would refer you to the Keyman documentation for more detail.
All right. Thank you.
Of course, it requires sharing your server somehow with the people public. I think that's a great idea and a great option. I hadn't thought about that myself.
Thanks.